Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen.
And I'm Simon Kuper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. Hello and welcome back to this very special episode of Heroes and Humans. Simon and I are speaking just ahead of the Euro 2024 final between Spain and England, and we thought this would be a brilliant opportunity to hear from some of you guys, the listeners, about the heroes we've featured in past episodes, some of those who are appearing in the tournament and indeed in this final, and what everyone's been making of the tournament. Simon, you've actually been in Germany for the last couple of weeks. How have you been finding it on a personal and professional level?
Well, I mean, I was gutted that a very mediocre Dutch team quite deservedly lost to England. I then took them.
You can't be that gutted then, right?
No, the Dutch fans weren't gutted either. I mean, you know, there were 80,000 of them apparently in Dortmund, most without tickets. And I was walking around at the end and hanging around the train station at midnight. And everyone was quite cheery. There was a Humper band playing. Everyone understood this is not a great Dutch team, and fair enough. So, although it was a last-minute England goal, England were just much better. I then took the night train, freezing, from Dortmund to Berlin, where I got in just before 6 a.m. So it's amazing and a tribute to my genes that I am still here.
Your stamina, your...
Yeah. It's the workouts. It's the daily Cristiano Ronaldo style workouts that make this happen.
It's the high rocks that you've been training for. Yeah. And generally, what about your second team? Actually, France. I guess you're the team. You're sort of, I don't know, adopted second team.
Yeah, I would say my children's team. So I have mixed feelings about it because I mean I've discussed before the difficulty in a family when my sons became world champions at the age of 9 in 2018, and they regard me with pity as supporting a bad team, which, you know, fair
so do
enough.
I, but for different reasons.
Yeah, although we don't support England either. But so, yeah, I have mixed feelings about France. I like my children to be happy, but I don't like them winning everything all the time. But I was just amazed at how little penetration this team has when Mbappe is not functioning. The attack is entirely reliant on one man. In friendlies before, they also had huge trouble scoring when Mbappe was absent. I mean, he was present, but absent in this tournament. He never seems to have got over the broken nose. He couldn't see with the mask on. He was rubbish against Spain with the mask off. And you can't be a world-class team if you're a kind of one-man attack. I mean, Kolo Muani and Marcus Thuram are not world-class strikers. Griezmann is not the Griezmann of even a year and a half ago. So I think the French had very few arguments. They lost to a much better Spain team.
And yet that Spain team has Alvaro Morata, who nobody considered to be world-class. I mean, his career seems to have stopped and started multiple times. But that is something that we can get into.
Yeah, actually, during France-Spain, after about 30 minutes, I suddenly noticed, hey, Morata's playing. I hadn't noticed him till now. And Spain were playing really well at that point. They were already 2-1 up. So, yeah, it's like France winning the World Cup in 98 with Stéphane Guivarc'h at centre-forward.
We're going to talk about the final. We're going to talk about Spain, and we're definitely going to speak about England. But just as we're on France, S. Gengrish wrote in on Twitter and said, I wanted to ask, is this the end for Deschamps? I guess he wrote this question before we got the official news, Simon, that he was going to stay on for at least 2 more years. How are the French public taking this news?
I think a little bit sulkily. I mean, Deschamps' deal apparently was that if they reach the semi, his contract is automatically renewed, you know, which fair enough. I think over the last 5 tournaments, they've reached 3 finals of Euros and World Cups. Now a semi, only once have they failed to reach a semi. So Deschamps, you know, although they produce very boring football that relies on the counter-attack through Mbappe, he has been magnificently successful. I'd say that he's also the most admired French leader in public life, because this is a country which despises its politicians. Whoever is president is despised within about 4 minutes. What's happening to Macron is just the pattern. And Deschamps, he's sort of, because he's from the Southwest, he has this Southwestern accent.
Does that make him what? A bumpkin in French terms?
He's a kind of shrewd, canny peasant, I think is partly how he's seen. And a very kind of steady guy with his head screwed on right, who's also extremely bright, and who also manages to deal with a team that is very much drawn from the non-white suburbs of the big cities, very largely Paris. He has a very good relationship with these players. They adore him. But I think French people admire him, and partly, of course, he was the captain of '98, but he's also something of a throwback to an older Frenchness.
Chelsea legend won the FA Cup in his only season with us, let's not forget. But he's already in his 12th year as French national team
that's
manager.
Amazing.
That is incredible. He will end up probably doing at least 14. And all
I
I'm
would say
thinking
probably
about,
30 or 40 years. I mean, you know.
So he's going to become the dictator of the French.
Well, I mean, the kind of dictator by acclaim. It really is a country where it's very hard to get consensus about anyone. I mean, Zidane has been waiting to become France manager
exactly
forever.
The guy that I'm feeling sorry for is Zizou, who has been out of football for like nearly 3 or 4 years, waiting for this job to come up. And we got a bit of a bed hog over here. Didier Deschamps refuses to
his
move
former
on.
teammate. And Deschamps was the guy who used to kick people on Zidane's behalf on the field. You know, Deschamps said, I don't have in my whole body the talent that Zidane has in one toe. And he was just this kind of brilliantly intelligent, thuggish protector of Zidane. And now the thing is, Zidane could have had most jobs in football after winning 3 Champions Leagues with Madrid. But rightly, he doesn't want to leave Madrid if he doesn't have to. So he rejects jobs at Manchester United and so on. But yeah, he would do the France job. I guess he could continue to live in Madrid, which is the most important thing.
I've been looking at his Instagram. I'm not going to feel too sorry for him because he seems to have the best life of anyone without a job that I've ever seen. He just gets invited to every prestigious sporting event, full stop. But yeah, I was thinking about Zizou. Let's move to England. And my little pet theory about whether England would ever move from Southgate is that they would love to appoint the English version of Didier Deschamps as a highly defensive, slightly boring coach. Deschamps not leaving. And Esken Grish's second question was, who's going to replace Southgate? But it looks like, as of this morning when we're recording,
Southgate's going to replace Southgate.
That Southgate is staying. He is going to get an extra 2 years. It's not been formally announced, but I think the FA are going to use the hype around, the fact that England are in the final to keep him. Simon, we did an episode about Southgate. We are both very divided on Southgate, I think, which is probably a reflection of where England fans are. I think most England fans would be closer to where I am on Southgate.
But neither of us think he's a great manager. I mean, I think he's a great man.
You think he's a great dude, yeah. I think he's a good dude, but you know. Is this the right decision? I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was obviously Gareth is going to stay because nobody else is going to hire him. There was this brief conversation about Manchester United because he's close to David Brailsford, but that hasn't worked out. And it looks like the FA are going to keep with the vanilla safest option in the world, which is Gareth Southgate. I think this is a bad decision, if indeed it happens.
When he got the job in 2016, he got it because he was the last Englishman on the shelf, and they had to appoint an Englishman after Brexit. And they had lost to Iceland. Morale was the lowest it's ever been, which in English football is saying a lot. If you'd said then, okay, this guy is going to reach 2 Euro finals, possibly win one, and also a World Cup semi, and then as he goes into the Euro final, all these people like Mehreen are going to be whining about sacking him. It would have made no sense to anybody in 2016. I mean, I think what he's shown is that he's a very good sort of sporting director. He's created a much more professional organization. I think the key breakthrough is that they dealt with penalties. They now actually prepare for penalties.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Practicing and psychologically. And actually, that might be the big difference between this England team and past England teams. I mean, I was thinking, I was at the penalty shootouts that the 2004 and 2006 team lost to Portugal, which was a very good team, which had probably done better in their tournaments than England have done this time. And they lost only because of penalties. So fixing that one thing may have fixed most of England's problem.
My issue is, again, with the bed hogging. And you said that, when he was appointed, there was no other English talent. We had a question, I think, about the lack of English managerial talent. But I would say now we do have English managerial talent and they should get a chance to prove themselves with England.
Who?
Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe is the first one that comes to my mind. For all of his faults, I think Graham Potter could be a brilliant England manager, given that the way that he understands modern football.
Hugely successful Graham Potter. I mean, I think that...
but Graham Potter and Eddie Howe have done things that Gareth Southgate haven't done, which is manage domestic, high-level English football teams.
Yeah, well, he doesn't need to do that, does he? He's a national team manager.
But he doesn't have any... This is a badly coached team.
Okay, what I would do is I would keep Southgate as the manager and I would appoint a coach who knows a little bit more about football. Which is sort of how Ferguson worked at United. He always had a field coach, like Carlos Queiroz was very important to him.
Yes.
Ferguson also wasn't that obsessive about tactics. I mean, I think the thing is that in 2016, Southgate takes on a team and he says, look, we've always had this fantasy of domination. England should win everything and England should play the other team off the field. We obviously can't do that. We should see ourselves as challengers. And so we should refocus into a much more kind of professional and cautious organization, and build into the team that can pass, can keep the ball a bit, and has some kind of defensive organization. And he did that. And that was what was desperately needed then. But I think now England, because they do have some of the world's best players, I mean, people are always moaning about the spoils overpaid multimillionaires. England factually just do have some of the world's best players. I'm not a fan, but they do.
Yes, which is why it's a travesty to allow Gareth Southgate to manage them.
And so now they should be playing a dominating kind of football. So I think that's the disappointment, that they should be dominating on the field almost as Spain did, but certainly as Germany did in most of Germany's games this time. We have the ball, we're in your half, we're playing thrilling, exciting, pressing football, which England at times did against Holland in the semi. And Southgate's teams just aren't set up for that. They're still obsessively defensive organised. I mean, I was very struck against Holland that Guehi, he stayed on the field the whole match, even though Holland sometimes had no centre forward and often just one. England had 3 centre backs. Guehi is not an international class passer. I kept asking, what is he doing? And a more ambitious coach than Southgate would have put on an extra midfielder. You dominate midfield, and then the 2 centre-backs at the back is enough to control Wout Weghorst. I mean, Wout Weghorst, for God's sake.
Okay, let's don't disrespect the Wout.
He's
let's
an
look to the future.
Yeah.
I guess he drinks so much milk, he probably thinks he's immune to all this kind of stuff. Look at the size of him. But let's look to the future. In 2 years' time, England are going to go to the World Cup in the USA. Whatever happens in this Euro final, they have to be close to the favourites, because this generational, all these guys in this team are going to be better probably in 2 years' time.
Except Harry Kane, but yeah.
Harry Kane being one of the big exceptions. Why would you want Southgate to manage them into a World Cup that they could actually win? Like, just get a better coach. I don't want England to win the World Cup, but if I was an England fan, I'd be apoplectic right now that the FA is doing this.
You'd be apoplectic that England are in their second Euro final in 3 years.
Yeah, I don't know how, this is a very sensitive issue. I don't know how much England hate we should do on this podcast, but like, we'll keep it for another episode.
I mean, the other thing about Southgate's results is that in these tournaments, there's a huge amount of randomness. So if Bellingham doesn't score an overhead volley in the last minute against Slovakia, England aren't here. It's been a disastrous tournament. They're out. Against Holland, although they were better, they could easily have lost. I mean, Holland, despite everything, had various good chances England score in the final minute. So the luck that England sometimes didn't have in the past, I mean, I'm thinking of the Euro 1996 final, where Darren Allison almost gets his foot on the ball in front of an open goal in the last minute. The luck they didn't have in the past, they're having a bit more this time. Partly because they have better players up front, individuals who make a difference.
And on this, Jorge Torres wrote in to ask a question about the style. His question is that Southgate is making the English team more continental than ever, which is something that you've sort of already hinted at, but perhaps it's ill-fitting. And he says this is correcting all of the errors that, Simon, you wrote about in your book, Soccernomics. Jorge says, fans seem to hate it. Do you think they'll be happy if eventually they win the final with a boring 1-0 performance?
I think it's like you've been waiting for a present all your life. You've been waiting for a second trophy since 1966. And when you get it, it's a disappointing anticlimax. So I think it won't quite be the feel-good that England fans have been imagining.
No, I completely disagree.
Yeah, you think the country's going to go mad?
Charles is going to bring them to, the castle. They're going to get all their medals. This country is going to be absolutely off its rocker for at least a solid week. Maybe the sun will even be shining and nobody will remember the performance. But what I'm really interested in this final is that I think you have 2 teams which on the face of it, got hit by merit and whatever. But Spain is a team of slightly misfitting players with a coach that's managed to create a great balance. And then you've got, I think, a badly coached team with brilliant individual superstars. So, I mean, on the Spain side, I mean, God love him, Marc Cucurella has been one of the most frustrating players I've seen in my life for the last 2 years. People like Nacho Monreal were like 4th, 5th choice at Real Madrid, centre-back.
Fabian Ruiz is absolutely a very mediocre footballer at Paris Saint-Germain. Brilliant here.
Absolute revelation. I think Nico Williams has been way better than I would have expected him to be. Of course, we've spoken about Lamine. In some senses, he's just continuing his brilliance.
Yeah, listen to the Williams and Lamine podcast, people.
And De La Fuente is, from what I could see of the Spanish media, and I went back to look after we spoke to Axel for the Lamine episode. Like he's been pilloried a lot, and he's a kind of very unfashionable sort of dude.
Well, he was a kind of underling of Luis Rubiales, the federation president who was sacked for kissing Jenny Hermoso on the lips. Who was disgraced. And I think De La Fuente was one of his claque. He also, like Southgate, was never a brilliant trophy-winning club coach. Jorge Torres' question is very good because what England were unable to do in the past, especially when they went ahead, is control the game. To control the game, you need to have the ball. If you have the ball, the opposition can't score. Johan Cruyff's wisdom. There's only one ball. If we have it, they can't score. It's all there. And England didn't do that. In the past, they would score and then they would retreat into their own penalty area and hoof the ball long for 90 minutes. So they did this against Croatia in 2018. They did it in a more mitigated version against Italy in the 2021 final. You give the ball to Modric, you give the ball to Jorginho, you are going to lose if you do that for 90 minutes. Now, what England have done at this tournament, even when they go behind, they stick with their system. They play a controlled, boring, short passing game that doesn't advance very far. They're very patient, knowing also that if you have people like Saka and Kane and Bellingham, you don't need that many chances. You're probably going to score. And so it's a system that works. It gives them much more control than before, which is a system that's appalling to watch. It's a system that doesn't maximize their qualities, but it's not a crazy way to win football matches.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Deschamps is the brilliant model to see how France have done it over and over again.
Well, France sit back and wait to hit on the counter, which England can't really do with Kane up front. So there is a difference. But I think the establishing control is something that Southgate's teams have done really quite successfully. I mean, they have been jammy. So many games, the opposition had higher expected goals than England. So the fact that England have got through to the final is just partly randomness, partly luck.
Have they not become Klopp's mentality monsters? I mean, these guys are they're scoring goals at the end of games and walking up to penalties like they know they're going to hit top bins.
I think
he
changed the mentality on penalties. And this has now been written by the Times, which upset England. But Ignacio Palacios Huerta has been their Basque penalty whisperer. And they have just taken this one part of the game that you really can improve through thought, effort, and psychology, and they've massively improved. And mentality monsters, yes, in part. Also having players like Bellingham and Saka who are brilliant, know they're brilliant, and will take responsibility at the decisive moment, that helps. England have never quite had those figures up front, certainly. But also, just we don't panic. We keep playing the way we play because we're better than Slovakia, we're better than Holland. And if we keep building with the ball, then probably we're eventually going to get the ball to a brilliant forward who will score. I find that English football discourse is all about confidence, psychology, momentum. These are words that I somewhat distrust. I think it's partly just the way they set up.
But and we have spoken about in Southgate episode the chasm between how these players play for their domestic clubs and when they come to England, the shirt just seems to be too heavy for them. So there's some psychological element.
I agree. And Southgate identified, I think very rightly in 2016, that people didn't want to play for England. They were afraid of playing for England. They didn't get joy from it. And he said the first thing we do is we make people happy to be here, which he has successfully achieved.
All right, next question.
We have a question from Avik Bhattacharya, who asked, and I'm quoting him, these are his words, not mine. Avik asks, what are your thoughts on Jude Bellingham's dickhead reveal, i.e. Bellingham is now seen not as the lovely boy that he was seen as a month ago? You are the expert on this, Mehreen.
Well, okay. I would call it his villain arc. And I would say that potentially if there is a heroes and humans curse, our first victim has got to be Jude Bellingham. Because we did an episode before the Euro finals where we spoke about this golden child.
Yeah, lovely
guy.
This
man who is overachieved in every single part of his life. At the age of 20 was being considered one of the best footballers in the world. And suddenly, almost as soon as we hit publish on that episode, I started to notice that actually Jude Bellingham is not being... is not getting the sort of unadulterated praise and love, especially by England fans or the internet, that we thought he would be doing. And that's because there's this very specific English mentality that when you get a bit too
you have to fall before you can rise.
Down. Yeah, we got to show you, we got to humble you a little bit.
Yeah, Beckham and Rooney.
Well, it started to happen. Beckham and Rooney, I think it was legit. There was a legitimate reason why. I mean, red cards, the way that they performed. But actually, the funny thing about the Bellingham villain arc was that it was happening not because he'd actually done anything. This was before the tournament. I noticed that people started making memes about this perfect boy and how, he speaks Spanish so well and how he's such an adult. So people started taking the piss out of the fact.
He doesn't speak Spanish so well, by the way. But anyway, he speaks a little bit of Spanish.
Well, that's exactly the point. Everything that he does is seemed to be completely amazing. And this was actually, I think, aimed a lot at the media. for the way that they've sort of framed Bellingham. And then, of course, when he started playing, he had a very slow start to this tournament, despite scoring the opening goal. Before that incredible goal against Slovakia, probably the best goal of this tournament, there were lots of problematic moments on the pitch, mainly because he just wasn't playing well in a team that really didn't understand what it was supposed to be doing on the pitch.
Yeah, his role hasn't really worked out as number 10. And one reason England was so much better against Holland was Foden took over as number 10, free role, coming to the ball all the time, supplying passes, feeding the team in surprising ways for 90 minutes, which Bellingham didn't do. Bellingham was a much more peripheral figure in that game again.
And I did notice that now that we were in Bellingham's dickhead era, that when he's on the ball, the commentators are just like effusive. Like he'll do a little turn and they'll be like, wow, look at him. And so you start seeing everything that sort of suggests that Bellingham has been, is getting a bit too much love. Then there was the crotch incident, which probably was the true dickhead reveal. So after that Slovakia game, when he, rightfully celebrates, scoring an incredible goal.
Last minute overhead volley. Yeah.
It's just dreams.
I won't explain Roy of the Rovers to you again, but it was Roy of the Rovers. Okay.
It was. As we very, presciently predicted in our episode. So after the game, he's seen doing a gesture where he looks like he's staring at the Slovakian bench, and he puts his hand in his crotch area and sort of suggests something. I don't know. I'm not a man, so I don't know what he was trying to suggest. But it got picked up. It became, the clip went everywhere. He had to justify it, saying it was something that he was saying to his friends who were actually just above the Slovakian bench. There's a brief conversation about whether UEFA would take any action against him for the gesture. But it really was like, I'm like, if he's getting into a villain phase of his life, I love it. It makes him way more interesting as a person. Hopefully the next Bellingham episode will be about all of the unsavory parts of his character, because like, who doesn't love a villain? I love a villain way more than I love a hero. Villains and humans and villains should be our next podcast.
I mean, Brecht, the German playwright, said the best character in the play is always the villain. He's the character you're always drawn to.
So on Avik's question of Bellingham's dickhead reveal, it's been one of the best things about watching the Euros for me. I've loved it, every moment of it. Give me the memes, inject them into my veins.
Yeah, but he still has to fall, right, for his arc to be complete. So it's a problem for the tabloids especially. If at 21 he wins the Euro, something that the English have been waiting for 58 years, he needs to fall as soon as he can after that. So I feel for him, because the arc is you rise, you're the golden boy, then you have this Hugh Grant caught with a prostitute in Los Angeles, David Beckham sent off against Argentina, you fall, and then over the years you clamber back up and you end up a national treasure. So in 30 years' time it will be Sir Jude Bellingham, isn't he looking wonderful, greets the, King William with flowers sort of thing.
I think that in the 21st century, the villain arc is a little bit different.
Really?
And I think because of social media, you can stay golden in the eyes of the traditional media, but the people, like the streets won't love you. And to get the streets to love you is a different kind of thing. So I think there's more of a gap between, I think, how actually he's been so, held up as a model by the so-called mainstream media, and then how, like, real people or social media
or real people, the people you encounter on social media. Who do real people, to use your phrase, love who the mainstream media doesn't love in football?
Oh, that is such a good question. That is a very good question. With this England team, it's hard. But I'm almost kind of pointing to like football hipsters who will like find a player, like the kind of people who be like, I always knew that Fabian Ruiz was going to be one of the best midfielders in the world. I mean, those kind of people. So there's always that kind of like, oh, these are the kind of underrated.
I hope none of those people are listeners to Heroes and Humans, by the way.
Well, there's the overrated, underrated debate. I think Bellingham is now being put very much, he's an overrated camp, and actually there's much better players out there. I think Kobe Mainu is somebody that the streets love. I think he's my guy. He's the one that in this tournament is kind of shining and is finally being given a chance. So I think there is a bit of
Finally, I mean, he's 19 years old.
I know, he's an old man.
By current football standards, that's quite old.
Yeah, he's done his A-levels. Anyway, let's move on to another question. This one is from my colleague at the Times, Hamza, who's a fantastic a sports writer and can do things with data sheets on football that make my mind boggle. But Hamza's asking a non-data question. He's asking, I guess, the political question of this tournament. And he says, some footballers speak about political issues and others don't. Should they or shouldn't they? And is the phenomena of footballers speaking about socio-political issues a symptom of a political system that is failing, and hence the need for young, often men, to speak and represent a constituency that is being victimized, failed, or not represented? So this is a very, very big question, and one that we do also touch upon in our episode about Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal, not because they speak out necessarily, but that they are subject to so much political noise.
Can I start? Because speaking out, the players who have done that this tournament are most notably by far the French players who spoke out against the far-right party, the Rassemblement National, because President Macron weirdly suddenly called parliamentary elections, and it seemed that the far-right had its best chance of entering French government since the Vichy regime fell in 1944. Hugely dramatic, terrifying moment for many of us in France. And I live in Paris, I should add. Starting with Marcus Thuram, later also Mbappé, Jules Koundé, other players, Thierry Henry, who's a coach, spoke out and said, Thuram in so many words, people shouldn't vote far-right. And happily, the far-right, expected to be the biggest party in these elections, came third. So I think Politico ran the headline, Marine Le Pen 0, Kylian Mbappé 1. I'm not sure the players had that much impact. But anyway, this is an astonishing example of players speaking out in a partisan way against the biggest political party in their country. And I applaud it. I mean, firstly, because we all have a right to speak. You know, I mean, surely that is freedom of speech. We can all say vote for party X. You don't have to listen, but we can all say that. And the other thing is that what you get very little of in the political debate in European countries is young black people from underprivileged backgrounds speaking in the debate. That really is a missing voice. And
well, this is the Rashford effect to some degree, right? If we're talking about it.
Yeah, Rashford comes in and says, you know what, a lot of people in England, including me in the past, a lot of kids don't have enough food and they go hungry, especially in the school holidays. And the people in government at the time, in Boris Johnson's government, were like, what, hungry? You mean peckish, surely? And so Rashford is introducing an idea that is absent almost entirely among the political class. And in the French political class, there is almost nobody who is young of color who can speak with some experience about what it would mean to have a governing party that would set the police on you, which I think is one of the first things the far right would do. And so I think these missing voices are absolutely essential in our political debates. I mean, Nigel Farage talks about the people as if the people are just older white people.
So what was interesting, because the French election was staggered between first round and second round, I noticed that after Kylian and Marcus came out, the knee-jerk reaction from the far right was like, we're not going to tell these multi-millionaires are not allowed to tell us who to vote for. So there was actually a worry that this was going to have a counter. It was going to be unproductive to get rich footballers to say, don't vote for the far right.
And maybe it was unproductive. We will never know.
Well, maybe the result would suggest, we don't know. It's very difficult to disentangle these things. One of the things that I've noticed is maybe, and this is what Hamza's question is getting at, how white players have responded to being asked kind of overtly political questions. One of the ones that really sticks in my head is Unai Simon, Spanish goalkeeper, who was asked before the Spain-France game how he felt about sort of political interventions from French players. Unai Simon was like, I don't really think that this is something that footballers should do. We should stay out of politics. John Stones at an England press conference was asked about in the run-up to the UK election, and he was kind of like, we don't really get involved in politics. So there is that little bit of a disjuncture. The other one that I would point to as a good example, however, is Germany. We haven't mentioned Germany so far in the Q&A. Tony Rudiger gets a lot of crap from actually so many parts of the German media because he posted on his Instagram with his finger pointing up and sitting on a prayer mat before Ramadan. A German journalist said that he was making a sign for ISIS, that he's an Islamist. Before the Euros, a German newspaper actually ran a poll asking its readers whether there were not enough white people in the squad or whether there were too many non-white faces in the German team. About a fifth of people agreed with the proposition. This did then cause a kind of uproar. People like Joshua Kimmich and Thomas Muller did have to come out and say, I'm sorry, we are a nation. We look like our nation. We are a team and we don't need this crap sitting on top of us.
I mean, in French polls, at the start of the century, when they were world champions, more than a third of the population thought there were too many non-white players in the team.
Yeah, so I think for me, a sign of progress is always when we can get white players to be as comfortable speaking about issues of race as the black players feel that they need to be. It's incumbent upon them to do so.
Yeah, well, this is why I liked Southgate in the podcast, and you gave him no credit for that. So I think kudos. But I think it's very hard for players to speak instinctively about subjects that they don't have personal experience of. So I was talking to an agent about this. Why do players speak out about racism, but not about, say, Qatar's treatment of migrants and LGBTQ people? And the agent said, well, black players have personal experience of racism. It's a subject they know, a subject they feel comfortable talking about. White players don't. And none of these players know much about what's happening in the Gulf. And so if you ask them about Qatar, they feel they're on uncertain ground. And I have some sympathy with that.
Yeah, I also just don't buy the argument that just because you don't speak on one issue, that means that you're completely invalidated when you raise injustice in another area.
Yeah.
I think that's just this form of like bizarre relativism that is just used to shut down a conversation. Next question, going back to the Netherlands. This is from Richard_2001. He asks, what do you think of the Dutch opting for a strategy of hitting long balls from the goalkeeper rather than passing it short, which is what they did in the match against Turkey? Apparently other teams, and he mentions Arsenal, are also getting trained to do this these days. Is this based on a risk analysis? I find it quite frustrating to watch as a supporter.
Well, I find it quite frustrating to watch as a supporter will be my analysis of the entire Dutch performance, or almost the entire. Yeah, so this is a country with the most glorious tradition in world football. We taught the Spaniards how to play like this. I grew up in Holland, I should say, and so I support, the most noble team in international football. And then you have a team at this Euro with mostly second raters, with, for crying out loud, Wout Weghorst coming on as striker all the time. The Burnley
Again,
Wout Weghorst.
besmirching the great Wout's name.
He's actually the heir to a massive chain of petrol stations. So if he wants to share any of that largesse with me or with Heroes and Humans, he knows how to get in touch.
Sponsor the pod, Wout. Sponsor the pod.
No, I mean, we're in advanced talk. However, as a footballer, he's a disgrace to the orange shirt. And so the Netherlands has almost got as its option A, Cambridge United, 1993, long ball football, get it on the big man's head, because they can't play proper Dutch football anymore.
How sad. How sad. And so the Johan Cruyff episode, which everyone should listen to, is about the making of the future of football. And the question that I had as soon as we recorded that is, why are the Dutch failing to do what they taught the rest of the world to do? This is like when England told everyone how to play cricket better than them. Like, how have they managed to lose it?
This is about informational superiority. If you're the only people who know how to play proper football, like Holland in 74, as we talked about in that podcast, you are going to shock the world. Then, unfortunately, the world figures out, oh, let's do it like the Dutch do. And so once the Germans have the same knowledge as the Dutch, the Germans are going to do it better because there's more of them and they work harder. So then the Netherlands is screwed. And now Spain, so Cruyff goes to Barcelona, he hands the knowledge to Pep. Pep implements Dutch football, but better at Barcelona. And then all of Spain takes it over. And so Spain learned it from the Dutch. You should see the Dutch as missionaries in this process. And then the Spaniards, unfortunately, take it to the next level. And so, I mean, I smile benignly on them because they are our creation. And that's the tragedy of the pioneer. You get overtaken by imitators who do it better.
Can I just also voice my somewhat frustration at the passing from the back kind of thing? And I actually noticed that the French team started doing this in the last 10 minutes of their game. So Saliba was getting instructed by Deschamps. You could see him pointing at him to actually go long.
Well, they brought on various forwards who
they
didn't have any other way of getting on the ball.
Yeah, so like let's mix it up. I mean, okay, we don't need to play like Peter Crouch is playing up front for us, but like I don't think that it's a bad strategy sometimes towards the end of the game to start hoofing.
I was going to say Weghorst is the poor man's Peter Crouch, but in fact he's the rich man's Peter Crouch, given his family wealth.
He's the fossil fuel version of Peter Crouch. But let's just talk quickly about number nines. There was a question about number nines. I thought Füllkrug was a revelation in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, he could have scored 3 against Spain, and then we'd be having a totally different pod.
Yeah, and then everyone would be writing trend pieces about why the number 9 is back, but it hasn't happened. But maybe that's a trend piece that somebody should write about why the number 9 should come back as a traditional.
I think Füllkrug is the best shooter and header at goal in modern football.
Yeah, he's such a throwback. Love it. We love it. Next question is from Aidan Reagan, a very, very clever man who works as an academic at the university in Dublin. He wants to know, does urban planning and a lack of public spaces explain the difference in footballing style between England and Spain? And broadly, Northern versus Southern Europe? Is this about the decline of street football in car-dominated public spaces? Now, this is a brilliant question. We probably don't have definitive answers, but I'm very willing to speculate about the differences in urban spaces, in the kind of footballing cultures that I know. So, Simon, we've spoken about the banlieue being incredibly successful, and we've also spoken about why the Basque Country is incredibly special. In terms of from a geographic urban planning senses, I would think that these are very different sorts of environments where young footballers learn to play street football. What are your kind of initial thoughts?
One is, why do Spain play differently from England? Because Spain was colonized by Dutch football and then took it further. And in England, there is also still this idea of football as war. So there's two ways of talking about football. Football as art, football as war. And then most recently, there's a third way, which is football as kind of data analysis. And the English, the battler figure, the Brian Robson figure is very much admired in English football, and you don't really want to fully take that out. So I don't think it has so much to do with urban planning, but Johan Cruyff, and any discussion of football has to keep coming back to Cruyff. He said, look, I grew up with street football, and on street football, you learn not to fall because then you tear your trousers and the concrete hurts. And so you learn balance, you learn to play off the pavement edge. And he said that's lost now. I mean, I was one of the last people who played street football in the 70s. Already then, cars were starting to drive us out. Cruyff's solution was to fund these, through his charities, these Cruyff courts, these kind of cages that you, as you've said to me, you also get in South London, but you see them more and more in Dutch neighborhoods. Often a star player will sponsor or be the patron of a Cruyff court in his home neighborhood. And these little spaces where you learn to play, that's you don't learn tactics there so much, you learn technique, you learn skill.
And that's actually, I think, bridged the gap. So that I think the relative, the crowdedness and the density of large urban cities in Northern and Western Europe. So I'm thinking again about what the cage represents. So you have a high cage, small pitch, and you have players, and this is, the South London boys talk about it. You're 7 or 8 years old and you're playing with boys that are 10, 11, 12. You have to be able to maneuver out of tight spaces. Boys are bigger than you, so you've got to use your body in really innovative ways. And you're on a really hard pitch, so it's tough, right? So you can't fall down. So like you said, balance, all of these things. So I think, Tony Rudiger again speaks about growing up in Neukölln in Berlin, where, the concrete is so hard that you can really, really hurt yourself. You have to learn to be super tough. So in some senses, you get two archetypes, very tough, hard defenders, and also these very small, diminutive, technical players. People like Raheem Sterling are like one of the first generation of the cages. And then you have academies who go to the cages, watch these boys play football, and then take the talent and develop them, through this kind of raw, the raw stuff that they see getting played out on the streets, which is not about playing on roads anymore, but it's about playing in enclosed spaces.
I mean, ideally you have both, and that's what we have in Western Europe, that you also have a club system where you play on real fields. In Paris, those fields are AstroTurf, so people can play on them 24 hours. It doesn't seem to harm the development of Paris players. And, so the question of why are countries like Portugal or Croatia or Denmark better at football than China or the US or India, it's partly because we just give people immense opportunities to play from age 6 on grass, sometimes in cages, with proper coaching. And so that's the beauty of the Western European football system. We do both.
Viva Western Europe.
So our urban planning has not been so disastrous. I mean, if you live in Shanghai or if you live in Delhi, your chances of playing football anywhere are close to zero.
And still true in East and Western and Central Africa. One of the figures that we've spoken about, Arsene Wenger, now spends basically all of his time trying to do a lot of really, in-depth talent scouting and development of players in Africa, because he thinks that all they need is a chance and they can be brilliant. So, penultimate question.
Okay, so we have a question from Rey Iruegas. I hope I'm pronouncing that halfway okay. He asks, how does this Euro compare to others in the past in terms of playing style, and why have teams seemed scared to go for it and play attacking football? What do you reckon, Mehreen?
My hot take is that I really haven't enjoyed these Euros as much as most people. I found the football pretty terrible, not because of playing style, but definitely in the group stages because of the bizarre arrangement that the UEFA had about who gets to qualify. And the third group match was invariably an incredibly cautious event because countries knew that all they needed was a draw to be part of the third place group of teams that could get through. And it really really killed the tournament right in the middle. So just as you're about sort of really getting into a tournament, it's like game 2 or 3. And those games were awful from what I can remember. I can't really remember great ones. There are teams like Turkey that really stood out to me, that really surprised me. One of the youngest teams in the tournament. I loved watching the Turks play. Fans are obviously incredible. Huge diaspora community in Germany. But generally, and I always have this bias, and this is a difference between us, I'm a club football kind of girl. Club football for me is the most elite football in the world.
It's so much better than the Euro, yeah.
And I'm getting on the tourist bandwagon of caring about Euros and World Cups. I always find a struggle. So I'm a bit of a general tournament hater. I never find the football particularly great, and I'm not emotionally invested enough in any of the teams to really care too much. But you are Mr. Tournament Football, Simon, so you can probably give us a better comparator. You can compare 2024 to other tournaments.
I mean, it's entirely correct what you say, that the best of club football, the Champions League knockout rounds, high-level matches in the Premier League are so much better than this football. I mean, when Spain-Germany happened in the quarters was the first game I thought, wow, this could be like a Champions League match. I mean, until then, you see a lot of players who are just not of that caliber. And then also the teams don't know each other well, like club teams. So, yeah, I mean, from a football point of view, it's dispiriting. The tournament goes on much too long to spend, 2 weeks winnowing down 24 teams to 16 teams, where you're really only getting rid of really poor teams with respect, like Albania and Scotland. It's just endless, and it's only in the last few games. There's too many
countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Euro was 8 countries, and when it was 16 countries, it was a better tournament than the World Cup in terms of quality. Now it's not. So yeah, they wrecked the Euros. Do teams play more cautiously than in the past? I mean, boring football is universal. I'm not sure it's more boring this time. I think England and France are being particularly dispiriting. I mean, England, I think, have a better individual quality than France, but both teams have not made anything of that quality in terms of being exciting to watch.
Getting to the final, we arguably have the best playing team visually to watch, Spain, and one of the most boring, England, coming together, because that's the way the group, the system that dictated that England got a very easy run and Spain actually had to beat some pretty decent teams. What are our thoughts ahead of this final? We've already mentioned why on paper they're very different archetypes, Spain and England. One team of a little bit could be seen as misfits, the other incredible individual talent, but they haven't really found a balance. I will say that everything I've said about Gareth Southgate in this tournament so far could be caveated by his choice to drop Kane, introduce Ollie Watkins and Cole Palmer. If he does those two things, then I might be open to thinking that Gareth Southgate...
So Kane is going to start the final. Southgate is not going to do anything weird ahead of this match. Southgate is not a guy who makes revolutionary decisions. What may happen...
It's not revolutionary, it's just bloody obvious.
What may happen is Kane comes off 10 minutes earlier than he would have otherwise, given that England have so much attacking talent that much of it is on the bench and some of it isn't even here, like Jack Grealish. So, I mean, that's another thing that England have, that against the Netherlands, you can bring on 2 players who would start for most teams at this tournament, Watkins and Palmer, and they change the match. I mean, it's not really a fairy tale. I mean, these are top-class players in the best league in the world.
Spain's bench, I'm looking at it, they don't have, they've suffered big injuries. So Gavi, Pedri are not here. Carvajal is back for this final because he was suspended for the semis. That would be a good win for them. I think Dani Olmo should probably start.
Dani Olmo has been magnificent, yeah.
I mean, Joselu, bless him, Ferran Torres, Jesus Navas, older than Lamine Yamal's dad. These are players that are around La Liga, but again, I think the starting 11 is the team that, if they're going to get it done, we'll have to get it done against England. If it gets to penalties, I fear that England will actually win.
Yeah, I mean, Spain will struggle to renew the team mid-match as successfully as England can. The thing is that everyone would say Spain are favourites to win, given that they have been better. In a one-off match, that means so little. If this were a league over 38 matches, Spain would be the European champions. In a one-off match, England are totally good enough to win this or to fluke this. So you will not hear any predictions from me.
Oh, I was just going to ask you. I'm going 2-0 Spain.
Refusing.
Marc Cucurella with a double, because he still gets booed by the German fans, which I find one of the most moronic things that's happened.
Yeah, I was wondering, he kept being booed against France. Why?
Because the Germans in the stadium, of which there's always a sizable contingency because it's Germany, are booing him because they thought he did the handball, that they didn't get the penalty in the quarterfinal, which is crap.
Gosh, it was as subtle as that. In my ignorance, I thought it was French fans booing him for a reason I couldn't work out. No,
if French fans were going to boo anyone, they should be booing Aymeric Laporte, but they don't, because he abandoned France, and then because Deschamps dumped him, and then he went to play for Spain.
And Lenormand as well. If I have this right, both Spanish central defenders are in fact French.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I would just very quickly say that if these guys were brown and they had those kind of split loyalties, it would not be tolerated. Anyway, final question.
From Colin Savage, how do you explain Johan Cruyff to children, especially teenage girls attending Taylor Swift shows in Amsterdam, in the Amsterdam arena, which is called the Johan Cruyff Arena? So I've spent my life trying to explain Johan Cruyff, probably unsuccessfully. How would you explain him to children, Mehreen?
I feel like Colin may have been stuck in a concert with his daughter and her friends listening to our episode about Johan Cruyff trying to drown out Taylor Swift. And
but you are the only Taylor Swift, Johan Cruyff crossover person in the world.
Yeah, in that Venn diagram, it's probably just me. So I thought it's interesting because we could probably bring in an American football parallel, because American football is my other big love. Taylor Swift is dating a guy called Travis Kelce, who is a very successful tight end who plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's why the connection between Taylor Swift and sport is becoming a thing. She's generating a lot of revenue from the NFL. So I thought about this and I thought, and there's probably nobody here, especially not you, to prove me wrong, but isn't Johan Cruyff the kind of totemic sort of figure in soccer that Joe Montana was for the NFL back in the day? So like long-haired quarterback, incredible player, quite salacious private life, and sort of the guy for the era was Joe Montana at the Jets. So I'm going to say that's how you explain Johan Cruyff to Taylor Swift fans. Johan Cruyff is not Travis Kelce. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's Joe Montana. Prove me wrong. Don't at me, people.
There is so much to unpack there. I'm not even going to start.
I think it was not a bad attempt, okay? It's not a bad attempt to say that he's a Joe Montana-like figure. The truth is that Johan Cruyff did so much for football that it's very difficult to even find an equivalent figure in an equivalent sport that did that much.
When Dutch people draw analogies with Johan Cruyff, the names that typically come up are Vincent van Gogh, Jesus Christ, and Albert Einstein. I'm not even going to begin to explain, except that Van Gogh everyone saw the sunflowers and thought, oh, there's sunflowers. And Van Gogh thought, look, they're purple. And everybody saw a football field and thought, just a football field. And Cruyff saw it in a completely new way and he redesigned football. So Joe Montana doesn't cut it for me.
Thanks for everyone who sent in some brilliant questions. I think it shows the depth and the breadth of our listenership, some of the excellent interventions. We're going to be doing this again pretty soon, so you can contact us on X and on Instagram at Heroes and Humans with all of your questions about past heroes and humans that are featured on episodes and some that are coming up. You can find episodes on Gareth Southgate, Jude Bellingham, Leo Messi, who plays in the final of the Copa America this weekend, and on Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal, probably two of the outstanding players in the Euro 2024 championships.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Kuper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.